What's up, Ego Hackers? Welcome to Season 23, Episode 4. This is a private lecture, Season 23, Jungian Parenting, or How to Parent Each of the 16 Types. How to Parent ENFJs, also known as the Clerics, also known as the Mentors. And congratulations, you have an ENFJ child, and you need to figure out what to do. Season 23, Episode 4, let's do this. Uh, as we've been going through how to parent series, this is kind of what the lecture materials looked like. We've been talking about who am I versus why am I, and we've been talking about the differences between nature versus nurture, and how nature and nurture, it's really, really important to know the difference when you're parenting somebody. Now, don't forget, it is your responsibility. In fact, it's every human's responsibility to parent somebody, even if it's not your kid, even if you don't even know them. If you see a child misbehaving in public, you are obligated as a human being, as an adult, to parent them, even if it's kind of in front of their parents. If their parents are kind of asleep at the wheel or something, I'd parent their child and I'd parent the parent at the same time. In fact, my ISTJ brother-in-law does it all the time, and I've been on the phone with him while he's done it to other people, and I'll admit, it was extremely hilarious every time. And the guy knows what he's doing. I always have to give him credit in that area. He is fantastic. Now, what I mean is that, like, just because they're not your child, if you're an adult and you see a child misbehaving, you got to say something. See something, say something. It really just is, because the problem is that our race is so xenophobic, we're so disjointed, we're so disconnected from one another, that, like, we're not really in a position to be able to learn from one another in a way that's meaningful. And not only that, we expect people to live in monogamous relationships. We expect people to live in the nuclear family, and both of which is actually very damaging to children over time. Now, a lot of people think I'm crazy when I say that, but I honestly cite the book titled Sapiens. I also cite the book titled Sex at Dawn by Christopher Ryan. I also cite the Bible, and I also cite the Quran at the same time, as all of these sources that basically indicate, oh, and U.S. Census Bureau statistics to go on top of that, as well as every book written by Rollo Tomasi as well. All of these books as sources to back up the claim that monogamy and the nuclear family is not something that's actually healthy for children in the long run. It really isn't. Because if you look at how people used to live in tribes, tribal living basically allowed children to be exposed to so many people within their tribe, and they had access to a whole wide array of cognition, potentially all of the 16 types at once, and each adult had shared responsibility in raising up the child, and then as a result the child was able to grow rapidly and would become far more intelligent than other children who were raised under monogamous parents in the nuclear family, and then as a result they would completely just, you know, be disregarded. Furthermore, another aspect of the nuclear family and monogamy that is also terrible is the fact that the number one cause of divorce, at least men divorcing women or men cheating on their wives or leaving their wives or abandoning their wives, is because their wives have a nasty habit of putting their children above their father, above their husband, basically. And that is the number one reason. There's entire books that women and mothers have written, entire areas of family law, as well as psychotherapy and behavioral therapy, that literally zeroes in on how women have this problem where they put their children above their husbands in their relationships, and it's, or the father of their children in relationships. But what's worse is that it's technically biological. It's biological for women to do that, but it's also biological for men to have multiple wives too, especially when you look at Christopher Ryan in the Bible and the Quran, and Sapiens and eventually Rollo Tomassi's work as well. If you look at all these sources, you can really literally see the same message being given to you this entire time. And a lot of people just have a problem with that. But I mean, you're also talking to somebody who vehemently maintains and can prove that the Bible doesn't condemn premarital sex. Judaism certainly doesn't. The Torah doesn't. So why would the New Testament do that? Did God change his mind or something? A lot of people disagree with me on that standpoint. But if you really want to know the actual standard of sexuality out there, it's Matthew chapter 5, verse 37. Quote, let your yes be yes and your no be no. That's the actual standard. But everyone's hearts are so hard, so they can't really understand that standard. And because we live in a society where there's this expectation of monogamy, which enables women to have the innate feminine entitlement known as solipsism, which can be a problem, especially when it comes to parenting ENFJs, and we'll talk about that a little bit, it can be even worse than that. And oftentimes, a lot of people just don't really understand how to manage these issues. But the bottom line is that whether or not you guys understand it or not, and I also cite the boy crisis by Warren Farrell, which I also recommend that book as well. Although I don't like his solutions that he offers in the book, but he definitely identifies the problem very well. But there is a lack of cognition due to monogamy and xenophobia within our race. People just don't talk to strangers, right? We're taught at a young age to not talk to strangers, when the reality of the situation is if we talk to more strangers, we would learn more, especially as children. And I guarantee you, and no, I'm not telling you to make sure your children are talking to strangers. Maybe you should talk to strangers first so you can get to know that person so that they're not a stranger to your child. You know what I'm saying? But here's the bottom line. There's only so much that formal education can actually offer a child, right? This is especially important for ENFJs to consider because they often drink the formal education Kool-Aid in thinking that they'll finally have social proof that they're smart because they're so afraid that they're actually dumb, and they're not, but they're so afraid they're dumb that they buy into the education system, which leads them into a situation where they spent the majority of their life focusing on their education only to make it into their 30s and be unable to produce a child. Oh wait, that's what happened to my ENFJ X. She oftentimes was trying to get pregnant in her 30s and she literally couldn't because she wasted all of her fertile years on her education and trying to seek God and spirituality, and I can't have premarital sex, I can't get pregnant, and then as a result she's absolutely miserable and in therapy to this day over that entire situation. To the point where she was a virgin up until she was like 30, 31 years old. That's sad, like extremely sad, so please understand that there's a problem there. Now, granted, when it comes to like men and sexuality, there's still additional rules like let your yes be yes and your no be no. That's the gold standard of sexuality. But for men, I also say, hey, don't have sex with a virgin, because if you have sex with a virgin, you're responsible for her like indefinitely. So just keep that in mind. Yeah, sure, go have sex with a virgin. Just realize you better be willing to keep her, because disparaging a virgin is a horrible thing to do a person. And the other thing is don't have sex with another man's wife. Unless of course like you have permission from him or something. But even then, like it's not a thing. You shouldn't do that. Again, the standard is let your yes be yes and no be no, and there's those additional things there to consider. But regardless, this leads to children being born, and they're born into these nuclear families where they don't have exposure to in-laws, they don't have exposure to the tribe, they don't have exposure to the extenuated family, and it actually gives them a huge disadvantage, and they end up becoming undereducated from a psyche point of view when they're an adult. Again, there's only so much we can rely on formal education for, except, of course, being brainwashed by the Matrix to serve the Matrix and be an agent of the Matrix. Of course, I mean, we could do that, right? Because formal education is that good, right? Hashtag Common Core, an absolute total failure. All the standardized testings out there, absolute failures. The No Child Left Behind Act, also a failure. You see what I'm saying? Like, it doesn't really do any good. And besides, formal education really only benefits SJs and sometimes NFJs. Affiliative people, especially SJs. They benefit. And then all the other kids just get labeled ADD, ADHD, or labeled autistic, one or the other, because they're not SJs. They're not part of the 40% of the population because they're all minorities. They're all mental minorities. So what are you doing? You see what I'm saying? Like, you can't do that. So I recommend that as parents, you go out of your way to understand the nature of your child and how to nurture them properly, because they're at huge disadvantages because the society buys into monogamy. That already is a disadvantage. Did you know that children used to nurse off of all of their mothers? You know, all the wives underneath one man. And I'm not exactly advocating for poly here, but I'm showing you the significance of poly and how it positively impacts children. Because you have multiple women doing wet nursing simultaneously, which they're able, if they don't have a progesterone deficiency, they're actually able to not get pregnant while they're continuing to breastfeed. And if there's many wives having multiple children, they all get to cycle through their breastfeeding, etc. And then as a result of that, they're able to control when to, get pregnant again versus when not to get pregnant again, which means they don't have to expose themselves to, toxic synthetic birth controls out there, which, by the way, for birth control, I recommend Prometrium, which is a bioidentical progesterone, 200 milligrams before bed every night. And you can take it through your period or not or whatever, but either case, that's my recommendation. And no, I am not a doctor or a licensed medical practitioner or professional to say that. That's just my personal opinion. Do that instead of using synthetic hormones, or get yourself a copper IUD and just hope you don't have genes that are weak to copper poisoning in the process. But those would be the only two methods of birth control I'd recommend, other than either the rhythm method or pulling out, just so you know. Otherwise, there's just really just don't do it and don't screw yourselves up. The number one cause of breast cancer out there is synthetic birth control. A lot of people like, oh, you need to prove that, you need to back that up. Guys, it's obvious, and there's tons of documentaries and tons of books about that phenomenon. Just go look for it, and I'm sure you'll find it, okay? So understand that that's a thing. And, as parents, you need to be aware of this phenomenon as it is. But we live in a monogamous society. We live in a society that has a nuclear family. And because of that, children are losing out on that. So we have to adapt. We adapt to that situation. Now, again, I'm not against monogamy. Monogamy can be good. Just the thing is, in a monogamous relationship, the woman has to work a lot harder, because a woman is biologically supposed to be putting her children above her man. But in a monogamous relationship, if she's putting her children above her man's going to leave her. Basically, statistically, this happens. So she has to work harder in a monogamous relationship and still continue to put her man above her children. A lot of people take issue with me when I say this, and a lot of people get so pissed off, especially on all the Facebook threads, about it. But I'm sorry, guys, just get over it. That's a fact. It's a fact. It is indisputable, okay? Because here's the thing. If I, as a man, is going to go out of my way to work my ass off for my woman and my children all day, and I come home and the children are being served first and the children are being handled first that entire time, and my wife is being thoughtless and not in preparation to meet my needs after I've been working all day long, meeting their needs, etc., and I should be due that respect. And it's very disrespectful if somebody else under my own roof, when I'm paying rent or I'm paying for the mortgage or I'm providing, and I'm the person who eats last. Really? No, that's not appropriate, and it's unacceptable. And I will throw that woman into the dumpster immediately and move on. Seriously. See, but of course, this really wasn't a problem, in a man who has multiple wives, because in a multiple wives situation, the women could put the children above the man, and it would just be the woman that doesn't have children would put him first, basically, and he would effectively cycle through them, basically, in terms of the one who gets the most of his attention, basically, and who has the most attention on him because she doesn't have children at that moment to deal with, etc. So it was always like cyclical within a relationship. Not only that, he could always leverage competition anxiety amongst those women, so that he would always have his sexual needs met because they would be constantly competing for his attention indefinitely, really. And this would create an equilibrium within the household, because the reality of the situation is that biologically one woman cannot actually meet the needs meet the needs of a man, because she will put her children above him. So she has to go counter to her nature via nurture in a monogamous society, right? To put her husband or her man or the father of her children above her children. She has to go against her nature, go against her biology in order to fulfill that in the context of monogamous relationship. And then as a result, that would have some severe negative impacts potentially. And then, of course, you get those women who are like, well, the children are more important. What about their needs, etc.? And it's like, yeah, but if you're smart, if you're paying attention, you would have all of their needs met. And of course, the husband is idealistic about love, and women are opportunistic about love. And with the husband or the father being idealistic about love, of course, he's going to show love for you. And if the children have a serious need at the moment that he comes home from work, whatever, he will attend to them or assist you in that process, so then he can have his needs met. Of course he's going to do that because he's idealistic. He's not opportunistic like his woman is. And that's just kind of, again, this is just basic biology, folks. It's just biology. This is not sociology. This is biology. This is nature, okay? So before you all get up in arms about it, these are facts. I'm sorry. Yes, I know that it flies in the face of your feminine conditioning or your feminism. I'm sorry. But you have to understand these things, especially when it comes to raising an ENFJ. Because an ENFJ not only will buy into monogamy and the nuclear family and formal education and all of the feminine primary social order and all of these bad things, that as a man or a woman, they will become victimized. In their adulthood, they will become victimized because they're FE hero and they're SE child. And this can be a serious, serious problem. So you have to be on their guard, because ENFJs accept authority while they're working hard to become an authority. That's how they are, because of how affiliative they are. They accept those who are in authority in exchange for one day they become the authority. Okay, I'll let you make the rules so that when it becomes my turn to make the rules, I get to make the rules, right? That's their INFP shadow talking, essentially. So they're affiliative to do the right thing and follow authorities, the authority of the feminine primary social order, the authority of monogamous society, the authority of the nuclear family, the authority of church, the authority of formal education, the authority of the government, all these authorities that are arbitrary and not originally how life was designed for human beings on this earth. Again, read Sex at Dawn, read Sapiens, and if you want to do spiritual things, the Bible, Quran, of course, as well, backs it up. Rollo Tomasi backs it up. Even Frank Viola backs it up. His book Insurgents talks about this very deeply. I also recommend Frank Viola as well. That being said, an ENFJ is incredibly weak to authorities because they so desperately want to become an authority. They want to be recognized and gain recognition as an authority. And that's just how these children will eventually develop, male or female, and it could be a serious, serious problem if you do not manage it properly for the sake of ENFJs. So we're going to be talking a little bit more about this so that you don't end up in these really, really bad situations as parents, which will also eventually lead to unwanted pregnancy, abortions, and even potentially drug use. Because ENFJs are mirrors, and if you put them around bad people, they will become bad. That's just reality. Okay, so again, we have the four sides of the mind that represents their nature, which is ENFJ ego, ISTP subconscious, INFP shadow, and ESTJ superego. Now, granted, that is just their nature, but you also have nurture, and nurture is what a parent or a person produces. I have nature inside. Every action I take produces nurture that impacts other people. Nurture equals impact. Therefore, you need to learn how to impact your child in such a way where it does one of two things. It raises them or it teaches them. One or the other, okay? Raising versus teaching. It's not the same thing, and you do it in different ways. So let's talk about that a little bit. Where does nurture come from? Well, how do we know that we're alive? The only proof of life, it's an old adage, the only proof of life that exists is the evidence of growth. When you have evidence of growth, that's how you know that something is alive, because there's growth, okay? There is death if there is no growth. You have to have growth in order to have life, and growth is very painful. Okay, this is why when people say, well, how can God exist? Because he allows all of this pain and evil under the sun, and why, how can he be a benevolent God and love us if he allows all these bad things to happen, death and rape and murder and all these things? And I'm like, because we're children, because he's a parent. We are children. We go and we want to touch the hot stove. He says no, you know, don't eat the forbidden fruit, right? He says no, and we do it anyway. And he doesn't interfere with that because he knows that we need to touch the hot stove and get burned so we can feel what it's like so that we know not to do it again. This is why the world sucks. This is why life is unfair. This is, of course, but, you know, with life being unfair, at least love can exist, because if life was fair, there would be no love. Think about that. But the bottom line is, that's why life on Earth sucks. It's a pretty beautiful place. It could be a fantastic life at certain times, but there's some really big time negatives, and that's why. And that's why God the Creator allows that in us, right? Allows that because he is a parent too, okay? He is a parent. We have to learn. We have to choose. We have to have free will. We have to be aware of all of these things. It's absolutely necessary, because if we don't, then we don't know what we're talking about. Okay? We don't, like, our entire purpose will not be fulfilled as a race. Okay? And it's because we can't be children forever. Being out of the Garden of Eden is like the allegory of the cave, you know, by Plato. Getting out of the cave and being in the hot sun and living your life and standing up to the elements, that's like getting out of the Garden of Eden. The allegory of the cave and the Garden of Eden is identical, okay? It is identical. It's man's initiation from childhood to adulthood, which is what you as a parent are learning to do, and that's your role, right? That's your role as a parent. Okay? Well, guess what? You need to figure that out, because in as much as the Creator has to parent us children, you need to learn what it's like to parent your children so you can kind of identify with where the Creator's coming from, right? Because it's always those people that whine about how bad life is here on Earth. They probably aren't parents. Think about that, right? So anyway, impact means process. So you need to learn how to impact your ENFJ child in a certain way. So looking at their cognitive functions, let's look at their cognitive functions. We have extroverted feeling, we have introverted intuition, we have extroverted sensing, we have introverted thinking, and that's the ego. And then we have introverted feeling, and then we have extroverted intuition, then we have introverted sensing, and we have extroverted thinking, demon, at the bottom. So the entire time, you need to actually target two functions. You need to target this function, you need to target this function, and ultimately you need to target let's see here, you need to target this function, but it's not the way that you think. It's all about impact, okay? So when you're teaching somebody something, you have to learn about something called impact, cognitive impact. And that's literally when you are taking concrete, direct action towards your child that will impact a specific cognitive function to cause them to react or behave in a certain way. It is a form of social engineering. If you want to learn more about social engineering, go to csjoseph.life/social, click on the YouTube link, go to the YouTube channel, go to playlists, and watch the season 21, and this is season 23. Go to the season 21 playlist and watch everything there is to know about social engineering, each of the 16 types, basically. Well, parenting is a form of social engineering, which you need to be aware of in terms of how that works. It's very important, okay? So how do you social engineer or parent a child, during their childhood? So there's two phases. There's actually multiple phases of parenting, but As a parent, there's primarily two phases of life in your child that you are responsible for. That's the raising phase and the teaching phase. The raising phase is their childhood. The teaching phase is their adolescence. Okay, up until that point that comes up. Now, remember, children present as their subconscious, and if you're having a hard time typing their child, you can at least, since they present as their subconscious, at least get them down to the quadra, so you kind of have a little bit of idea of what their top four functions would be, so you kind of in general know what to do. But until you absolutely know what their ego is, you might fly blind for a little bit. But the bottom line is that you need to be going out of your way. You need to be going out of your way to identify what their inferior function is as soon as possible. And in the case of ENFJ, that's introverted thinking inferior. They are afraid of being stupid, which means as a parent, you should never call your ENFJ child stupid. Ever. Ever. Okay? And you have to recognize that because they have extroverted sensing child, they're going out of their way to try to get your attention or somebody's attention at all time. They're constantly attention starved. And because of introverted intuition in their top four, because they're a child, it's very impulsive and they just start wanting things and they make bad decisions. And they may not necessarily know the consequences of their actions now. Thank God for extroverted intuition critic. They will eventually learn consequences of their actions. They're not like SPs where they just don't. And that's a huge problem. And then also they really constantly need recognition as well. But the bottom line is you need to deal with their inferior function right away, because during their childhood, that's when a person is supposed to be developing their inferior function with the assistance of their parents. Okay? Now, granted, when it comes to father and mother, it's very different. Fathers naturally know the strengths and weaknesses of their children, and they are very much willing to criticize their children over their strengths and weaknesses. Mothers, not so much. Mothers are just constant nurture, constant caring, and they kind of go out of their way to effectively enable their children. And without the presence of the mature masculine in the home or a father in the home, the mother is more likely to end up spoiling the children through her enabling, and they will be spoiled as adults, basically. And then all of a sudden, this is why we have the entitled millennials, Gen Zers, and Alpha generation. Yeah, because there's so many single mothers out there and there's so many fathers taken out of the home that we have this generation of fatherless people, which is leading to an entitled generation. Terrible. I wonder what's going to happen in the next World War, that I imagine is around the corner very soon. Just check out Strauss and Howe theory according to the fourth turning, and you'll see that World War III is around the corner according to that theory. Don't believe me? Read it and check it out for yourself. Gosh, I wonder how this entitled generation under the feminine primary social order is going to fare in that war. I would venture to guess it's going to be an absolute total slaughter, unlike the world has ever seen. There's some little expert intuition hero prophecy for you. Enjoy yourself with that one. Check out Strauss and Howe theory. I highly recommend it because from my point of view, war is coming and it is very inevitable and it is very around the corner. We are due for another world war and it is literally around the corner. Like that blockade in Venezuela, the Chinese bolstering their military by like 4x, and all that drama in Taiwan, the Trump administration selling weapons to Taiwan to piss off the Chinese, blaming the Chinese for COVID, it's going to suck, So the bottom line is that we have this entitled generation, and having an entitled generation leads to really bad things, like not being able to win a war because everyone's too entitled to go fight it, when their homes are about to be taken away from them, or worse. You see what I'm saying, folks? Like, we need to be more responsible as parents. So this fatherless generation is leading to, an absolute total collapse of society, either naturally on its own, collapsing under its own weight, or as a result of the drums of war. We have no idea. But either way, the four horsemen of the apocalypse is definitely following very closely these entitled generations. Perhaps these entitled generations are the four horsemen. Interesting. Again, check out Strauss and Howe theory. But these generations also represent individual archetypes as well. One of them is the hero function. The next one's the parent function. Generation Z, an entitled parent. The teenager generation, whereas you have the irresponsible millennials who should be responsible, right? And then you have the very childish, tyrannical alpha generation, because they're very tyrannical. They kind of like come off like a high chair tyrant to a point, right? And then after them, the next generation out, it's going to be super, super mega weak. Unless we, of course, we fix this fatherlessness problem, and then we won't have this issue anymore. And all of which heavily impacts the ENFJs in a negative way. But the bottom line is that it is your responsibility to raise up your ENFJ in a very meaningful way. And you do this by impacting their functions. And the function that you as a parent of an ENFJ must be impacting the most is their inferior function, introverted thinking. So what you need to constantly be doing as a parent is going to your ENFJ and asking them, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? Even if you yourself are a TI user and you don't care what they think, you ask them all the time, hey, what do you think about that? And when they answer, you have to say, well, how do you know that? You have to provide constant challenge to your ENFJ child to prove what they think over and over and over, even if it exasperates them or makes them tired, or if they get angry about it, or if they get lazy about it. You have to provide challenge. Anytime your ENFJ makes a statement, ask them, well, how do you know that? Get them to a point where they have to explain themselves to you. Because if they don't explain themselves to you, they will remain ignorant. And they will know that they're ignorant. And they will cover up their ignorance with pride. And this pride will lead to the ultimate mistake that an ENFJ makes. Getting everybody else to listen to them, but being unwilling to listen to anyone. Which will cause people to abandon them, not respect them, take advantage of them, see them as entitled, right? That would be horrible. No recognition. They'd literally be nothing more than a doormat used. If it's a woman, used for sex. Constantly. Guilted into having sex. All the time. Right? Guilted into doing chores. Guilted into working for other people and not getting anything or much in return. Okay? Being with an abusive, very selfish, depraved, entitled man will be your ENFJ daughter's future. On top of early pregnancy and abortions, because she's too ashamed and to reveal that she got an early pregnancy, and she's literally putting your grandchildren at risk. And it's your own fault. As a parent, congratulations. You played yourself. Anyway, you got to be aware of these risks, okay? My Expert Intuition Hero is all about consequences, so I'm telling you folks, if you have an ENFJ child, there's some risks involved. So, to do this, you have to challenge your ENFJ all the time. Because eventually, they're going to do what my ENFJ ex-girlfriend did. She would always tell me about how she had to fake it until she make it, right? And that's the ENFJ way when they have underdeveloped TI inferior. It's horrible. Now, when they answer something correct or when they explain themselves well, even if they're incorrect, be like, wow, you gave a really good explanation. You're still wrong, though, because you need to go look this up. You need to use Google. You need to look at Wikipedia. You need to look at an encyclopedia. You need to read this book. You need to do research. See, that's the thing. ENFJs oftentimes don't do research, and it gets even worse because they forget everything because they're so forgetful because they have SI Trickster. So to protect themselves from SI Trickster and to protect themselves from feeling stupid or other people calling them stupid or for them being afraid of being incorrect or protect them from their own internal pride that'll prevent them from listening to people and learning and becoming better themselves, you need to encourage them to do research and give them the skills to write down their research, okay? It is absolutely critical because by writing things down, they will remember. And by doing research to write those things down, their TI will become sharper and sharper and sharper, and they will have a lot more confidence in their performance in terms of thinking. And this will cause them to verify literally everything. It is your job as a parent when you're raising your ENFJ to get them to develop the habit of verifying everything and to not believe anything unless they see it, or not believe anything unless they have verified it ahead of time. You must teach your ENFJ child the concept of trust but verify. Trust what the person says, but always verify. If not, they'll be heavily taken advantage of. Imagine a guy who he ended up going on a date with the prom queen. He's an ENFJ. Everything's so good, but then all of a sudden she ends up screwing the quarterback of the football team behind his back. He feels absolutely betrayed. He gets really, really angry, and then he goes and stabs that guy 15 times, and then he's in jail. And he's still in jail to this day, right? How about you teach him to verify? And also, when it comes to dealing with girls, you teach your ENFJ son to never believe what they say, because women's words never match their actions. It's very rare it actually does, because it may match their actions in the moment, but later it's proven not to be. Or it may not match their actions in the moment, but later it will. It's always different. And I'm sorry, women, I'm not throwing you under the bus when I say that. It's just a proven fact that men need to be taught to judge women by their actions and not by what they say, right? That's just reality. That's biology. It's because of how women's brains work biologically speaking. You could verify this with Dario Nardi's work, for example, especially in his newest book, right? His older book, The Neuroscience of Personality, is fantastic. Please read it. And no, I'm not getting paid to say that. Anyway, as a parent, when it comes to an ENFJ, you need to teach them to verify everything. And you do this by challenging them constantly. How do you know that? Prove it. Show me. You got to say these things. And if you do this to your young child, even as young as 4 years old, up until the point they reach adolescence, they will become absolutely brilliant. Brilliant. Your ENFJ boy who would have been a beta to that prom queen, all of a sudden is the alpha, and she's so scared about losing him to some other woman that she won't dare go screw the quarterback of the high school football team because she's with your son. Because he's the man. Because he verifies everything. Because you challenged him as parents. Right? See, that's what's important there. Now, as soon as your ENFJ son makes it into adolescence, well, guess what? Guess what? It's too late. TI inferior, it's over. TI inferior belongs to their ego at this point, no longer belongs to you. And based on that, they're thinking for themselves, and hopefully you've built within them the ability, the capability, the skill, basically, not so much the habit, the skill. Skill is SE, right? And they're SE users. Habit is SI for SI users. Build in the skill, the SE skill of verifying everything. Hopefully they have that skill, because it's too late. Their ego's fully formed at this point. They're in, it's fully grown. They're in their adolescence. Their superego is popping out because the ego is grown. Thus, the superego appears when the ego is grown. And then all of a sudden, that ENFJ has got its TI inferior, and it doesn't matter what you say. It doesn't matter how much challenge. They're going to think however they ought to think, and that's just it. Welcome to adolescence. Get over it. Oh, I wish my child was as sweet as they were before. Yeah, well, you should have been raising them properly by bringing up their inferior function and growing their inferior function. But now you've lost that chance because they're adolescent already. And now they will develop their inferior function for the rest of their life. They will have to develop their subconscious. And if their subconscious is underdeveloped because you are irresponsible as a parent, you made them shadow focused, that's on you. Yeah, and their failures in adulthood because of their underdeveloped subconscious and because they're unhappy and depressed in adulthood, it's your fault because you didn't challenge their inferior function. That's right. Your ENFJ is depressed about underperforming and being stupid and not verifying and just a doormat to everybody they come into contact with and being guilted into sex, which leads to early pregnancy and abortion. It's all your own damn fault. Yep, it's your fault because you missed the boat, right? See, it's kind of interesting if you think about it, because what if there's no TE user parents? What if they're both TI users? Like, in my family, my parents were both TI users and I'm a TI user, right? And my TI parent was underdeveloped. and my SI inferior was underdeveloped, and I became super, super mega depraved because they weren't challenging my introverted sensing. They weren't bringing that there. So as a result, I made all of my mistakes in my life when I was 18, as soon as I was out of the house, basically, and my entire life fell, and I ended up homeless over it with $120,000 of student loan debt, right? You see? Consequences, folks. Consequences of parenting. And here's the other thing. There's no TE user there either to help me develop my parent and help me reach personal responsibility, right? There's no TE in there for this ENFJ to develop their TI inferior, right? Oh, well, I mean, that's what happens when you have monogamous relationships and two TI users get together and have a child, right? So then, oh, wait, C.S. Joseph just proved that monogamy might not be that great for all children if you're combining two of the same cognitive functions, because the parents are lacking the natural cognitive capability to nurture their children in a way that will make them successful later, because there isn't the presence of other cognition within their own family unit, within their tribe, within their extended family, within their community. Wow, aren't we such great human beings setting up our children for failure because of our bullshit social institutions? Amazing. Amazing. Congratulations on your bullshit society that I hope burns to the ground because it's done nothing but destroy everybody, including you and me. Wow. And what, I'm supposed to put my life on the line for this? Wait a minute. I wonder how those millennials and all those Gen Zers and all those Alpha Gen kids are going to feel when they're going to be forced to fight the next war. I wonder. I wonder. Did you know that the war on terror has been going on for so long that there are people joining the military today that they are supposedly fighting a war that existed long before they were even born? It's the first time that's happened in the history of the United States of America. You might want to think about that. You might want to think about that. You know, like unplug from the bullshit social order that we're part of. Unplug from that, please. Please, God Almighty, please. Moving on, shall we? So, at this point, they've reached adolescence, and now it is on you to teach your child. And you do this, why? Why do you want to teach your child? It's because you want your ENFJ child to learn personal responsibility. And in adolescence, they get insanely impulsive, right? Insanely impulsive, and they start making really, really bad decisions, okay? Especially in the area of sex, because SE child is the #1 function out of all the cognitive functions that is accused of being a sex addict out of all of them. And SE child, ENJ types, have more sex per capita out of all of the 16 types. They have the most sex out of everybody. And it's because they just can't help it. They have to have that constant human connection at all times in order to validate themselves, or to gain status and reputation for themselves, or to feel good about themselves, or even to feel smart in certain cases, to do it. It's just what it's all about. SE child is just, it's hypersexual. So you're more than likely with ENJs to have these sexual problems with your children, and you need to make sure that they are responsible. For example, you know, if I was going to have an ENFJ child, like if I was going to have an ENFJ son, I'd be like, you can have as much sex as you want, and with whoever you want. I'm not going to give away that. As long as you have a job, you have your own car, your own insurance, your own cell phone, your own everything, and a plan, and you have a track record of making plans and executing on those plans and doing well on those plans, so that I trust you. Because and by the way, I also, you know, like, you'll have it there. I'd say the same exact thing to my daughter. You have to demonstrate personal responsibility to me. Oh, and by the way, daddy has to respect the guy that you're fucking. So, and if I don't respect him, And if you still want to have sex with him, you're not under my roof anymore. It is what it is, right? See, it's not like I'm being one of those, you know, super Christian parents where it's like, oh, abstinence. Yeah, no. Like, no. No, and I'll say it once, I'll say it again. Premarital sex is not a sin, guys. Matthew chapter 5, verse 37 says, and I quote, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Judaism and the Torah does not forbid premarital sex. They actually practice it, okay? So you might want to consider like that there's some weirdness there. So for all of you Christian folk that are watching this, you might want to verify your beliefs and apply critical thinking to the Bible before you end up destroying your children like my parents destroyed me and my sister with their BS teaching. Great. You know? Might want to consider that. So anyway, it's your responsibility to teach your child when they are an adolescent. Now the problem is that their ego, because they're an adolescent, their ego is basically closed off to you. Because remember, you can't touch their TI inferior anymore. Their TI inferior is theirs. So what do you do now? You're trying to you need to develop that NI parent. You have to develop, because that's where their sense of personal responsibility ends up coming. Because their hero is stopping to be irresponsible, it's becoming responsible, but the entire ego needs to learn personal responsibility, and that will not happen until the parent function is developed. So you have to parent that function. Well, what do? Right? See, if you develop their TI function, the axis has already made them pretty responsible with their extroverted feeling, meaning that they will be caring and empathetic towards people that deserve it, instead of just to anyone where they end up being a doormat, which is cool because they're verifying everything, but they're still being really impulsive, and you have to stop that impulsivity as an adolescent. So then what do? Well, the only way to access the ego in adolescence is you avoid the ego, and you actually have to access it through the unconscious. So you have to target their extroverted intuition critic. So what you have to do is that when they make a decision, you have to ask them to their face, okay, why would anyone want to do that? Why would anyone want to have that guy as a boyfriend? Why would anyone want to have that girl as a girlfriend? Why would anyone want to work there? Why would anyone want to drive that? Why would anyone want to join that school club? Why would anyone want that career? You just have to constantly ask why, over and over and over to any critic. Why? Why did you want that? And you challenge them, and you force the ENFJ once again to explain themselves to you. And then through realizing how unwise it was that they made that decision, over time their parent will develop and realize that they're being impulsive and that they shouldn't want to do that, because you will be showing them the consequences. And anytime they make a decision, you have to tell them the consequences. And then every time you're proven right, you have to shove it down their throat and say, I told you so, especially the SE child, over and over and over. And write a little list of all the I told you so's you've ever done to them and post it on the fridge if you have to. Or text it to them every now and then. Set up an auto text to go out every 15 days of all the I told you so's as a reminder to your ENFJ about how they were unaware of the consequence of their actions. Any critical kick in, they'll realize they're being unwise, and through cognitive orbit, expert intuition will start growing the introverted intuition parent, and the parent will grow and it will become more responsible. And it is an indirect route to get into their ego. When they're a child and you're raising them, you got to go direct. You got to go right for the inferior and develop the inferior as much as possible. The parent function, not so much. You really want to focus on the inferior function because there's only so many years you have with your child to get them to develop their inferior function. So you have to focus all your effort on the inferior function. As soon as they hit adolescence, it's too late. You don't have access to their ego anymore. It's their ego. It's not yours. So you have to go through their unconscious through cognitive orbit to impact their ego through a different back door. And the back door is extrovert intuition critic, and do it in that way by constantly telling them the consequences of their actions, proving the consequences of their actions, holding and lording over the consequences of their actions over their heads consistently. It's not that you're taking away their choice. You let the ENFJ have their choice. Don't take away their choice. But when they make a wrong one, you gotta proclaim it. You gotta make it known. You have to tell everybody. You have to post it on the fridge. You have to talk about it in front of them so that they understand they done fucked up, right? It's super important. It's super mega important. And that's just reality. As a result, they'll get through their adolescence, and then when they hit adulthood, they won't be entitled. And guess what? They will be responsible, and you will not have to worry about them ever. And then guess what? They won't have their quarter life crisis, because that comes with personal responsibility. That's their quarter life crisis. They won't have their humility crisis. That's midlife crisis. They will be humble enough because they're verifying everything. They're responsible enough because they're not impulsive. And you've already just saved them from half their life. And it's not your responsibility as their parents to help them with their three-quarter life crisis or their final life crisis. It's up to their children to do that. Now the roles switch. What if you have an ENFJ parent? I have an ENFJ father. Has an ENFJ father. We have an ENFJ fathers. See, it's the children's job to actually help the parents through their third life crisis and their final life crisis, their death. It's the children's job. So why is that? It's because their parents are responsible for getting them to their quarter life crisis, their midlife crisis, and they won't have those crises if they follow this parenting process all the way through. So my dad, he just had blood clots last week. He almost died. It was pretty rough. He's on blood thinners. I'm trying to get him on keto because his triglycerides were like 140 or some crazy high amount recently. And sugar, when it goes into your body, it gets turned into triglycerides basically. And those triglycerides is what it sticks to the LDL and HDL and creates clots basically. So now he's on dangerous blood thinners, which I don't recommend for people. I recommend people just go keto and stop their insulin resistance, and their triglycerides will go way, way, way down. My triglycerides went like under 50 at one point in time, which means it doesn't matter what my cholesterol looks like because there's no sticky triglycerides around, then the LDL and the HDL aren't really going to stick together. You see what I'm saying? So there's really no point to really worry about that. By the way, this is like verifiable, and you can read about this on PubMed for those of you who still believe that cholesterol causes heart disease. Hello, that was debunked years ago. Wake up. Get with the times. PubMed. Check it out. So my dad, he's struggling with the wisdom behind taking the blood thinners, and I'm trying to help him realize that there's better ways, and he's just got to get his triglycerides down, and it'll change his life for the better, so he's not going to die and be dependent on these pills for the rest of his life. Because he eats way too much sugar. And he's also hypoglycemic, which doesn't even help either. It makes it even worse. He needs to be consuming a lot more protein, especially with him being endomorphic as he is. I'm more mesomorphic than he is. He's way more endomorphic than I am, but that's just reality. And then also, it's my responsibility to help him get to the point where he reaches mastery, where he's actually able to, remember his past in a meaningful way and use his experience for the sake of the betterment of mankind, which I have been doing. I remember telling my father to his face that he will not be allowed to become a pastor of a church, which was his dream, until he's willing to do it for free. Until he's willing to not take a check. At that point, he'll be ready to be a pastor of a church. And I told him to his face that he would have to accept being someone who works for a living full time, even at retirement age, if he still wants to be a pastor, and still do it for free. And he listened to me. And it was a huge stage of growth for him, and he was able to get over that crisis in his life basically. And he's on the path to mastery. I'm pretty proud of my dad for that reason. I also had a similar situation with my wife's father. He is a man who was heavily abused by his INTJ mother. His father was an ENTP. His father was Brazilian, his mother was Japanese, and quite frankly, she was a stripper and pretending not to be. I guess. I mean, what do you expect? I mean, this is what INTJs do. Her grandfather was in the military, the U.S. military, basically, and met in Japan and whatnot, and then married her, and then had my wife's father, and he still to this day struggles with verifying things, but at least he's not really impulsive. So he had that figured out, but his pride is some of the greatest pride I've ever seen in my life in an ENFJ, and I'm like, dang, and that's really because of his INTJ mother constantly doing what she did to him on a regular basis, not even spending any time listening to him, and even to the point where her TE parent was just like, you're so stupid, I'm not even going to spend any time listening to you or even challenge you, I'm just going to ignore you, which destroyed his SE child, and as a result of that, he felt like he never had her attention. Of course, that would be the case because she has SI demon. It's kind of hard for INTJs to give attention to more than one person at a time. It's extremely difficult for them. And I'm not saying that she's completely a bad person. I'm just saying that, or INTJs are a bad person for that matter. I'm just saying that's what happens, right? So please be aware of that, okay? So anyway, that's a thing. Another thing from a nurture standpoint, if you're going to parent an ENFJ, if you have an ENFJ daughter or son, you need to understand what hypergamy is, or hypergamy. Hypergamy is the feminine sexual strategy. It's basically women are pluralistic about sexuality. They have women out there who go for alpha seed, and then you have women out there who go for beta need. And they actually go for both throughout their life, and that changes in different phases of their life. There's different phases that women go through where they will look for alpha men or they will look for beta men, basically. And it goes down to how women cheat or how they divorce in various situations, or how they become war brides, and how they're able to, when their men are killed in battle, how they're able to emotionally detach from those men and emotionally reattach to a different man, etc. This is hypergamy. So the thing is that the feminism is actually a huge problem and has harmed daughters. So if you have an ENFJ daughter, feminism will do exactly what happened to my ENFJ ex-girlfriend, and she was trying desperately to get pregnant and have a child with me, even though she really couldn't, because she was in her 30s. She felt like she was expired. Her looks can no longer compete with younger women. She was constantly paranoid of me getting with younger women all the time, accusing me of cheating on her all the time, even though I didn't. And it was a serious problem. Constant accusations, constant "you're being disloyal to me" and whatnot, all because my security. And she didn't get that security because she couldn't, consolidate on me by having a child with me, basically. And it freaked her out. So I recommend teaching your ENFJ daughter to prioritize having a child and being a mother over her career. This is where people say I'm a misogynist and a chauvinistic, patriarchal prick, but no, I'm sorry. It really has to happen because statistically, women who focus on their careers, they end up in their 30s and they haven't had a child, and then all of a sudden they end up hiring C.S. Joseph in a coaching session where they're afraid that their husband is going to leave them because they're unable to produce him a child and he wants a child. And they're like, what do I do, Chase? What do I do? How do I social engineer him? Do I have to, is there some drugs I could take? I will do anything because he's going to leave me. I don't know what to do. You don't want your ENFJ daughter in that position. And you especially don't want your ENFJ daughter in that position, in that coaching session with C.S. Joseph, where C.S. Joseph literally tells her to her face the cold, hard truth. You don't want that. So, based on that, I highly recommend that you consider teaching her that, when you're in your 20s, between 20 and 26, have a baby with a man who is at least 10 to 15 years older than you, because statistically you're more than likely to be able to keep that relationship and stay married, and her child won't be fatherless. It'll be fantastic. Okay, that's the advice I would give to your daughter. Otherwise, if you just leave it up to chance, feminism will destroy your ENFJ daughter. Everyone thinks feminism is such a great thing for daughters. No, it's not. It's not. And there's tons of evidence, and just look it up. Like, literally, do the research. You'll realize how horrible it is. Now, for your son, however, tell him to do not commit to a woman, basically, until his late 30s. And until then, tell your ENFJ son to have non-exclusive sexual relationships with women until his late 30s, until he's found a woman who is worthy to marry. Tell him to only marry a woman who has had 2 or less sex partners in her entire life, and only marry that woman, because statistically, women who have 3 or more partners, the chances of divorce and cheating are skyrocketingly high. So I recommend to him to not marry a woman who has had that many partners. The less partners, the better, and then she'd potentially be less hypergamous that way because she's been exposed to less men, etc., in her life experience, right? And it's very important to him. Also, explain to your ENFJ son that women are only as attracted to a man as he is attractive to other women. That's the real source of men's attraction. A woman is only sexually attracted and sexually aroused by a man who is arousing to other women. That's the reality. So he has to consistently esteem himself for the rest of his life to maintain that sexual viability and that sexual performance and his sexual market value, so that if women want him, then he'll be attractive the most to the woman that he chooses, basically, if he decides to be monogamous in the late 30s. And again, I'm not against monogamy, folks. I'm just pointing out and critiquing it. There are some problems with it. Yes, there's advantages and disadvantages to it, as well as advantages and disadvantages to poly. Everyone needs to be aware of both, okay? Because literally all of society and the entire world and all social norms are completely 100% up for grabs right now, because hashtag 2020 is year zero. Don't forget that. So please consider that. Another thing that you need to teach him is that, like, multiple women are willing to share a successful man. So he shouldn't feel guilty about having multiple simultaneous sexual relationships with women, starting in his teens and then going into through his 20s, because uh, they're willing to share, and if they're trying to force commitment on him, and typically a woman forces commitment in like from 27 to 30, because they're more aware of how their looks no longer compete with younger women, basically, at that point, and that could be a serious problem. uh, and uh, and so because of that, they actually end up trying to marry men that are closer to, that they could be more secure for, easier men that they can get. So then they start, going after beta men at that point. This is kind of like why, my ex-wife's cousin, who is an ESTP, I remember her screwing alphas from 20 to 26 like crazy, and she's about to turn 28 right now, and she's getting married to her ISTJ beta male boyfriend from high school that she broke up with in high school at 18, or at 19, so she could screw a man who was 12 years older than her, basically. Yeah, interesting, funny how that works. You know what I'm saying? And that's just reality. So you have to explain, depending on the gender of your child, you have to explain both of these concepts to your children so that they can get the most out of life when it comes to, being there. Because women don't respect men their own age. They just don't, especially in Western society. So you got to encourage your daughter 10 to 15 years older than you. And the older a woman gets, that gap widens. This is why you have Dr. Robert Glover, who was recently on my channel. He's 63 years old, and his wife is 40. Think about that, okay? So the older a woman gets, the older man she can get. That's just reality, okay? So she needs to use her best and most fertile years, which is 20 to 26, to her absolute advantage, and get with a man who is 10 to 15 years older than her from that standpoint, which means she needs to be dating a man in her 30s and getting married to him. Okay? And statistically, it's more likely that that relationship will last indefinitely, especially if they're compatible. You might want to do that and encourage her to do that. That's how you, and then he'll be supportive of her. She respects him. He's already gotten through all of the pain in life and is stable, bringing in money, so the security is there. He's handling all that. You have an excellent son-in-law that you respect by default, and not some drug addict loser, etc., who's constantly getting your daughter pregnant and pressuring her to get an abortion, etc. All those things go away, okay? So please, please, please understand these concepts. It is absolutely critical for an ENFJ son or daughter, because they are hypersexual with their extroverted sensing child. They cannot live without it. And especially my ENFJ X, she, for religious reasons and because of her family, they even put her in like sex rehab. They like completely abused her in that regard, and she was a virgin when she was 30 years old, at the beginning of her security phase, the end of her epiphany phase, and she literally screwed so many guys, like back to back to back. In fact, multiple men simultaneously, meaning she'd probably screw two guys in the same day or back to back. Like do one guy on Friday night, do another one on Saturday night. It's that kind of level of hypergamy. So you don't want your ENFJ daughter in that situation because that was horrible. You don't want there, and it sucks that my ex-girlfriend had to deal with that and go through all of that because she was sold a false bill of goods under feminism in as much as men are to this day. Feminism destroys women too. Don't forget that, folks. That's just a fact, okay? So, anyway, as a result of parenting your ENFJs in this manner, they will basically have the absolute best relationships with you, their parents, and the relationships with other people. They will produce healthy grandchildren for you, and they will help you get through the final two phases of your life as well within the context of where you're supposed to go. If you want to learn more about that, make sure you watch season 19. If you don't have season 19, go to csjoseph.life / and then just put in your type. So if you're an ENFJ, that'd be csjoseph.life / ENFJ, and purchase the ENFJ package. It's only like $37 and you get season 19 and season 14 in that package, and you can learn how to get through those phases of life as an ENFJ basically. But this is kind of the other portion of how your children can assist you to get through those final phases of life as is necessary for their role. So anyway, folks, that's it for season 23, episode 4. Lots of harsh truth bombs. I know people hate me for saying it, but it is what it is. And as Martin Luther said, standing before the court, I can do no other. So with that being said, folks, I'll see you guys tonight.